and a very warm welcome to 172nd Security Thought Leadership webinar. And the idea of thought leadership is that we critique today an issue and subject matter that provides a foundation for thinking about it in a different way or more informed way, enabling us in the long run to have a better type of security. And today's topic is all about security qualifications and certification. Where do we look for credibility? This is a crowded area. We're told you need to get qualified, you need to get certified. And yet out there are so many. Where do you look? Are there too many for it to be credible? How can we begin to think about this? What's the way forward? And how can we begin to get there? Well, today I've got three panelists who are going to come at this from rather different angles, actually. In a second, I will ask each of them to introduce themselves. And once they've each done that, I'll then invite each of them to make an opening statement. 3 minutes when they get to say whatever they want to say about this topic. And when they've done that, I'll then open up the webinar for discussion. So if you have got a question that you would like to ask, please can I invite you to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Put your question on there as soon as you can, and we'll endeavour to incorporate it in the discussion. And I have already got some questions being sent in to me. So a big area, a lot going on. Let's meet our expert panel. And first of all, let's meet Gary. Gary, can you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Martin. Yes, hi. Gary Evanson. I'm a registrar of the Chartered Security Professionals Register here in UK. It's open actually to everybody in the world. So we've got quite a lot of international charter security people. It might be a new term for some of you, but worth looking into. My previous experience really revolves around being an army officer in the military police for about 34 years and about 15 years in the private sector as well. Including Westminster Abbey and Delarue International. So that's my sort of background.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate that. Let's go over to Malaysia and meet David. David, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is David. I am a senior lecturer over in Saito University College in Malaysia. For the past 10 years, I've been here. I've been a lecturer over here in Saito University College. Before that, I was about 20 years in the private security industry in the bank. That's about it.
Very, very good. Thank you very much indeed. And finally, we're going to meet another academic from the University of Leicester, Matt Hopkins. Matt, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Hopkins. I'm an associate professor in criminology at the School of Criminology here at the University of Leicester. I've done lots of research in the past around security, a number of related themes, and I've also been closely involved as well in a number of educational courses around security, predominantly security and risk management at master's level, which we deliver here at the School of Criminology.
Thank you very much indeed, Matt. Appreciate that. So 3 panelists, 3 experts in very different areas of this topic. Let's hear what they've got to say about this issue of security qualifications and certifications. Gary, over to you. Your opening statement, please.
Thanks very much. Well, I think credibility is the key word within this seminar, and appropriate. To be credible, it's got to be appropriate to role or position or sector. So that's the first thing. It also has to be pretty much valid and recognised either by a national institution within that country that's of operation or by the sector professional body. If you've got those 3 things aligned, then I think you're probably on a good wicket in terms of the validity and the overall worth of that qualification, which should be also a certificated qualification. Too many, yes, overall probably are, but mainly because the sector is not regulated. But also I would suggest because the security term is very wide ranging and broad and includes so many things from cyber all the way through even to things like resilience, even possibly sometimes for some people, business continuity. And because of all these, this plethora, you've got too many ostensibly. But perhaps if you hone that down to a specific targeted strand, then maybe not so much, provided it is appropriate, valid and recognised. Qualifications sometimes is used by the security sector, certainly in this country, UK, as that's all I need to have is experience. Well, I would suggest to people that experience can be bad or good. 30 years of bad experience just makes you worse. So that's the first perhaps reason why you want that qualification. I think you also should acknowledge that even if you've got 30 years experience of good experience and training courses in-house, getting qualified to be critical thinking and actually having a wider breadth of knowledge on your subject area will enhance your qualifications, enhance your experience. Training can be a substitute, but only in-house, of course. What happens is it doesn't often transfer into another arena. And the British Army is a prime example of that. They struggled tremendously in trying to actually get their in-house training courses actually transferred into qualifications in the private and public sector. So what it really boils down to is, yes, qualifications are good, probably too many, certainly in UK, but that points to regulation, and whether that be a state or professional body. Chartered, for instance, is one of those areas which actually tries to do that. Okay.
Gary, excellent. Thank you very much. Good start, good food for thought there, and we'll come back to those, I'm sure. Don't forget, if you've got a question and answer, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll endeavour to incorporate that in the discussion. Without further ado, then, let's go over to Malaysia and meet David again. And David, let's have your opening statement, please.
Hi, everyone. What I reflect what Jerry was just mentioning just now. I think it's very valid statement what she said just now regarding the education-wise should be valid, right? The certification must be valid. But then again, it goes back to the quality assurance. Okay, so when we talk about some sort of training, it has got to, or some sort of education, it has got to be quality assured. And when we talk about a program or a module, which many trainers out there or many institutions put out independent modules, I feel that each and every one of these modules must be quality assured, and it must be reliable and valid and very current. So sometimes when we talk about education, we all know there are three types of education, which is the formal education, which is what we all go to the university and etc. And then there's the informal training, which we go through these short courses provided by these short professionals, short courses, short modules, one-day training, certificate attendance, and that's it. And you are, you attended something. And then there's the non-formal. Now, this non-formal is what the informal and the non-formal also constitutes learning, right? And there's no denying that these are also areas of learning. So what the quality assurance body has done here in Malaysia is they have taken all these three formal, informal, and non-formal education and given an opportunity for those to enter formal education practices, learning, the university and such. That's my take on education. And it also applies to security education, right? Security and law enforcement education in Malaysia. We are in Saito University College. We are the pioneers. We're the #1 in Malaysia in terms of enrollment of students. And we have a very large area of from bachelor's degree, from diploma to bachelor's degree to master's degree as well, right? So when we talk about education, it has got to be lifelong, especially in the area of security and law enforcement. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Now, again, some very interesting thinking going on there, and material we can return to. Please don't forget, you've got a question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Do get your question in. Amanda can't see your question. Do get your question in, and we'll come to those once we've finished. We've heard from our final panelist, Matt Hopkins. Matt, your opening statement, please.
Yeah, so I think that the questions are really fascinating, actually. And having given some thought around these questions, obviously it's very difficult to answer them without quite a bit of debate, I would say. But I think the first question, are there too many qualifications or courses, and why is this, is obviously fascinating. And I think you have to say from the start, the number of options that there are in relation to security courses, the choice is absolutely bewildering. There's just so much out there. If you just have a quick search on Google and look through what's available, it's absolutely bewildering. And anybody who's coming into security must be completely must be confused by the amount of choice there is. So, for example, if you look at the Security Industry Authority, it lists over 40 courses just from level 2 to 6. which, as I say, is fairly bewildering. But why is this? So the question is why do we have so many courses out there? Well, I think the first thing is it relates to demand. There's clearly a hunger for security courses out there, and there's clearly hunger for courses from fairly low-level entry to SIA licensing, to master's level and PhD study. So that demand is there. And I think what's happened is many suppliers have come along to service that demand, and there are many training and educational suppliers who are just filling the demand out there. And I think we have to remember that, you know, courses can be very resource intensive to develop. So it's not as if just anybody's just coming along and developing a course. It takes a lot of resource to do this, but there are suppliers out there who are meeting that demand. And I think one of the other things we need to think about, and I think this is really a key question here, is what are the industry needs? You know, what does the security industry need? And I think as Gary mentioned earlier, it's a huge industry, and security itself is such a nebulous term, and there are so many different things and training needs in relation to this. But a key question for me comes around, what is the quality of courses out there? Is there sufficient quality out there to meet the demand that there clearly is? And I think that takes us to the question is, you know, what is a credible qualification, and how do we identify what credibility is? And I think in the industry, we hear a lot about professional standards, we hear a lot about CPD certification, and I would suggest that certification is a really good measure of quality. But I would also think about as well, if I was choosing a course, you know, who is the provider? Who's delivering this course? Does the course actually deliver anything which is useful? And also, who is recommending the course as well? And for example, if you look in the UK, I mean, the Security Institute gives us a list of approved trainings providers. So does the International Security Management Institute as well, which I think are good places to go to understand where the kind of credible training providers are. Of course, for any course as well, I would listen to people who've done courses previously to understand about the quality of the course, how useful it is, because thinking as a university provider, you know, a lot of our reputation actually comes from people who've done our courses previously and what they say to other people. And then finally, I think the question about what importance should we attach to qualifications in relation to kind of the credibility of the security sector. Well, I think this is essential. If you want to professionalize the security sector, there've got to be expectations around qualifications, and there's got to be expectations around what should be completed in relation to qualifications in the security sector. So, for example, you know, you wouldn't go to a doctor or a dentist unless they were appropriately qualified to do their job, and the same should really be true of the security sector. And so I think we need to think about what the industry needs in relation to the kind of practicalities of the job. So what are the practical levels of training which are required? I think the industry needs to be educated to think and plan and to understand going forward. But also I think the industry requires a qualified workforce to be seen as professional, and also to attract the right caliber people to the profession going forward. I think without that kind of professionalization, education, you're not going to attract the right caliber people. So for me, qualifications really have to be ingrained into the culture of security. But for me, there's a real key question here about what does the industry need? So what sort of training, what education does the industry need? Is there sufficient quality out there? And also, are we providing the right sort of qualifications for what people in the security industry need at particular stages of their career?
Matt, thank you very much indeed. And again, you've posed some interesting questions. Let me start off. We've got an interesting response from the audience already. Gary, let me come to you first. And I want to just deal this question about credibility. And one of the striking things, and let me admit to being part of the problem here, I was a university lecturer part of my life. I stayed up and give lectures at a very high level, and yet I was never trained in teaching. And I wonder whether there could really be credibility in this sector if we don't have training of trainers in any formal sense, a requirement for trainers to be trained. Let me start with you, Gary, and I'd like to get the thoughts of David and Matt on this too. I mean, it seems strange to me that isn't at the forefront of people's thinking, train the trainers first, get that right, then worry about whether the courses are right. Gary.
Okay, well, I mean, you're talking to somebody who is trained to teach. I've got my PGCE in higher education, so I am a trained teacher. So they're not that short on the ground. They do exist. In the training world, it's usually de rigueur that you are a trained trainer, because that's part of their CPD program and their own training as they go through their own career, because they're usually trainers and nothing but trainers. When you get to the university side of life, of course, as you well know, that's not the case. And I think there's a lot to be said for perhaps lecturers in universities having been trained either at PGCE level, higher education, for instance, before they set foot trying to tell people how to critically think. Because it doesn't, for a lot of people who know their stuff, it doesn't come automatic that you can actually then train other people or teach other people. So you're on a winner there, but that actually is true of all subjects, not just security. It goes right across the board in every walk of life. Probably the most trained trainers are the health and safety areas, business continuity areas. That's where you'll find most trainers are trained to the proper standard. So yes, it is a positive to have.
Do you know, Gary, I didn't know that you had your teaching qualification all those years. David, now you picked me up on the word training, and as we met before this webinar to get it started, you picked me up on the word training. Do you just want to say what you said, because you don't agree with training, the word training?
Well, I will repeat myself one more time, Martin. We don't train people, we train animals. We educate people. We educate people very simply because people are thinking people. People can think, they can feel, and they have psychomotor skills to work with. And they can basically move, they can engineer themselves, they can reskill themselves, they can upskill themselves. So we don't train anymore. That's one thing I would say. But while saying that as well, when we talk about teaching, security, right? It is what the market wants today. What the students need to learn. It's not what we want to teach anymore. It's those days we want to teach the students this. We want to teach the students that. It's no more that way. It is what the students need to know. And how do they find out that? It's basically based on market needs, based on today's demand. What the student needs to learn about security today, the IR 4.0, how it's going. What areas of what 4.0, IR 4.0, technology, cybersecurity, all these areas are what drives the learning today. And learning is across board. You don't have to go to a university to learn. They can even learn on Google. They can learn online. They can learn on YouTube. Learning is forever. It's not never ending. And students today can learn from anywhere at any time they like. That's why universities offer micro-credentials. They offer MOOC programs as well. So the students pick up what they need to learn.
Okay, David,
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Matt, let me come to you on this. I mean, as Ian Griffin says in the questions, you shouldn't be a trainer if you don't know the subject matter. Well, quite so. But I mean, Gary's right. In the world of higher education, it's not a given. And I wonder whether there is a problem there, Matt, that we just don't choose to tackle very often in any systematic way.
Yeah, I would take slight issue with the facts around training in higher education, because, for example, in my own school, everybody's trained. Everybody has to have a HEA qualification, whether that's a fellowship or a senior fellowship, to be allowed to teach in higher education. So for me, the quality of teaching is not an issue. I think where people might question teaching in universities of security qualifications is the fact that very few people who are actually delivering security qualifications in universities have actually done the job. I think that tends to come up as an issue. It's not how good you are as a teacher. It's this kind of practical knowledge of doing the job. But again, I would take slight issue with that, because I think a lot of the qualifications that we would offer, say somewhere like here at the University of Leicester, it's not actually about the practicalities of doing a research job. It's about learning about a lot of the theoretical aspects of criminology, security, risk management. And I would actually argue that to understand that, you don't necessarily need to have done the job previously.
Interesting. Well, we might come back to that, Matt. But I'll tell you what I want. I've got quite a lot of questions here, and I just want to make sure I incorporate them. Matt, let me come to you first on the question from Mike Gibbs. And rather interestingly, one of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm examining a PhD. I've just been reading it this morning on convergence, and of course, this is the bringing together of physical, cyber, and personnel security, other departments too, under one umbrella, which is being forced on us. Do you feel, Matt, that the teaching and the focus, are universities nimble enough to move quickly enough to meet demand? And by that, I mean that sort of emerging world where developments are happening quickly. Matt?
That's a really good question. I think sometimes in a practical sense, we'd have to say no. And by that, what I really mean is what's happening in the workspace and the kind of the immediate practical challenges for security around this. Because academic delivery of courses is quite often related to the fact is you tend to be drawing on the academic evidence and on the policy evidence around this. Academic courses are built on building up literature, building up that knowledge. And as we know, something new might happen tomorrow, but it's only in the literature 6 months, a year later. So that's a real issue for educators, I think, in this space. Whereas the guys out doing the security are saying, oh, well, we've got this problem and this issue is coming up around cyber and ISO, whatever has just come out. We need to know more about it. We will be saying, well, hold on a minute. There's no literature on this at the moment. And I think that tends to be a bit of an issue here.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, that actually. Thank you. Let me come to you, David, on the same question. You come at this from an academic viewpoint too. I mean, that is the point, isn't it? I mean, academic courses tend to operate from a theory and a research perspective.
Actually, Martin, Matt was correct as well. He was correct that academics are basically very bad teachers, especially when it comes to real world applications. What I'm going to let you in a little secret, what we do at Saito University College, right? What we do here is work integrated learning. What we do is we get the students, we teach them all the theories first, and then we push them into the industry where they can work and learn at the same time, the latest what's happening there based on the learning outcomes that we have already worked out with the industry. So when that happens, they come back to the university, right? And they sit for an assessment, or maybe they sit on the assessment at the place of work, right? And that happens, they get qualified with the latest information, latest technology, and they have fulfilled the learning outcomes which they have desired to get, which the university has desired to get. So when you do work integrated learning or work-based learning, right, especially in the security industry, this actually brings them to a higher level, job ready. Once they qualify, they're ready to hit the ground running. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds to me as an ideal that, but that takes some organizing. Gary, let me come to you if I might, and just developing this question, which Amanda Gentle has done for us, speaking on behalf of the regulator in the UK. And maybe we'll draw off your more teaching thinking on this as much as your security specific. And that's about capability-based training and professional development, and how this might support further professionalization of private security. I mean, what the SA are trying to do is get a link through the whole sort of sector, right from the very bottom to the very top. It's a sort of a roadmap, a profession map for security. The key is to have the criteria for what good performance looks like, what capability is going to be needed at each level. And on that one, Gary, as you said, it's a very wide sector. There's a lot out there. Tricky, one would think. I mean, clearly it's tricky because Mandy's asking the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is you put your finger right on the button there, which is you can't just say security. It's got to be security with the brackets after it, which might be cyber, and it might be a strand of cyber in its own right, which will then target the type of education that surrounds that. And I would also add something to the previous two talkers there about a lot of the master's level courses, certainly, and some bachelor's courses too, but mostly masters, are usually at a point in their career when they're already in the industry and perhaps quite advanced in the industry. And that can work quite well because that experience piece I talked about in my opening 3 minutes, then you start to get this knowledge base and the critical thinking applied to what they thought they already knew. And then you get this really good thing coming together of somebody with almost the light bulb moment of saying, do you know what? I really didn't understand where I really sat in the great scheme of things. And also the second thing I'd point out is cross-sector stuff. You mentioned convergence. Convergence is as much a management thing as it is a security thing, because I could certainly pose it to you quite happily why you shouldn't have convergence just as much as why you should. It depends on horses for courses, it depends on the industry, it depends on the structure, it depends on the multinationality, everything else. And also, what are you trying to converge? Is it the management bits of that, or is it the technical bits of that, etc.? So nothing is simple, but you've got to start doing the building block stuff. And the SIA really does need, in its own thinking, to start doing the building block stuff to set the framework and the basis for how all this will actually pan out in the education and training world. Because they're about the only organisation currently that can do that legitimately. And I say legitimately, that's the key.
Yeah. Okay, I get your point. It's the regulator for the UK, for those of you from overseas. Matt, let me just come to you on this point, because one of the things about academia, if you wanted to base a course on convergence, you wouldn't have a lot to go on. And I guess it's one of these points, isn't it, about how you determine what people really need to know and what the criteria is for then saying we've got something that's really different. I mean, I'm not saying people wouldn't say it anyway. I'm just saying the criteria we might, if we could understand what the criteria are, we could judge people's assessments of their claims much better. But not easy in the world of security, Matt, or is it never easy?
Well, it's never easy. I mean, I think one of the things about educational courses, and I think of, the way that we've developed courses in the past here, is the first thing you want to do is identify if there's a market for those courses. And I mean, generally, a lot of the sorts of courses I've been involved in the past is the subject matter on those courses. It tends to be very much set by academics, rather than set by people doing the courses. And it's almost as if, I've tended to find in the past, it's almost as if people within the security industry come to university and they're quite happy almost to let academics set the agenda. They're quite happy to let them do the teaching, not as if because they're in awe of academics or anything like that, but it's almost as if they come feeling, well, this is clearly what the people with the knowledge think I should know, type of attitude, which always is not a good thing, I think. I think we could learn a lot more from the security sector about what it wants us to deliver as academics. But I think a lot of academic courses, and I think a lot of people who work in universities would tell you this, is, courses survive by bums on seats, ultimately, by how many people are coming in. And if you're getting bums on seats, then that course remains viable going forward, and you'll continue to run that course, sometimes regardless of how dated some of the content might be on those courses.
Yeah, I recognise that, Matt. Okay, let me come back, Gary. I want to come back to you on something here, and it's a question from Nadeem. And it talks about the various methods. Let me interpret Nadeem's question in a slightly different way, if I might. There are different ways of learning, and through COVID, we've become used to online as opposed to face-to-face. There's part-time and full-time. And I guess what no one out there seems to have a clear on is what's best. I think in the courses that you're delivering at the moment, Gary, they're very much online, and that's got its flexibility. Do you think you lose by not having face-to-face interaction?
Yeah, you do, of course, but you do get face-to-face interaction on the medium we're actually using now. What you're not getting is the body language proper and the sort of eyeballing piece. But don't forget that if you go back to the origins of teaching, not everyone is the same. Some people actually respond better on this type of medium than they do face-to-face, because they have a personality trait which is intimidationary or whatever, and they prefer to do it online, for instance. So it's not everyone the same. Some people will benefit from online. I certainly did when I did my degrees. I found that a really fantastic medium for learning. I'm a learner that likes to go away, having heard a tutorial or a lecture or whatever, and go away and do my own thing. But not everyone is like that. Some people need to be at your coattails to talk. I need to run this past you all the time. So you gain and you lose. It's whether the balance is correct overall for that course, I would suggest. And that's usually comes through the eating, monitoring it, the quality assurance piece that they talked about before. The quality assurance has got to be pretty good. And if you just let things run and don't quality assure them, that's when you're going to start hitting problems. But there's nothing wrong with online. There's nothing wrong with facial, in the room with you and lecture halls. I suppose the one thing you might lose, although technology is picking up on it, is that communal being able to talk to other students. But of course, now online is actually so robust now, it's actually having that ability to do that as well. So we shouldn't be afraid of technology and its uses. I think it can help so many people learn quickly and better at their own pace, but it does lose certain elements. Of course it does.
So let me come to you, David, because I've just had Gary say some of the benefits of online. Presumably you don't agree with that, because earlier on you were saying about the benefits of doing physical and integration. So presumably that requires face-to-face and rather steps in the opposite direction to where Gary was going. David?
It's not that I don't agree with Gary. I agree with the main things that he said. I agree with that students learn at different pace. Yeah, the pedagogy is different, especially online. But today, since the COVID is almost at the end, right, we are moving to the TVET area, the technical vocational area, where students actually go and do things, right? They go to an institute and learn how to march. They go and learn how to observe. They go and learn how to do self-defense. They go and learn how to do marching. They go to shooting. These are all technical areas which you cannot do online, right? They learn how to pick up fingerprints from a fingerprint in the fingerprint lab, which we can't do it online. These are all technical things which, at the end of the day, a holistic learner, right? I agree with Gary as well. You can learn some things online, but at the same time, you have to do things, because it's a psychomotor area, which also your fingers, your hands move around, and it's important as well. And then again, we have the affective domain, which is the feeling, right? Sitting in front of a screen right now, right? You have, how can you express your feelings to a person, right? And without actually seeing, touching, talking to the person, body movement and language. That's what I'm coming to anyway. But Gary is right as well, right? There are different ways of learning, right? So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
David, thank you. Okay, very much. Matt, I'm interested in your view on this, Matt, because is there a view amongst your colleagues, let's get it down there, about what's best? Whether one type of, I don't mean for them as academics, I mean for the student in terms of whether they learn more or perform better as a consequence of one type over the other. Matt?
Yeah, so I mean, during the COVID period, we moved to completely online teaching, and we didn't really see a great amount of difference in terms of overall outcomes for students. But I think there's an issue to think about here in relation to the security sector and the way education is delivered, because what we want is people in the security sector to have access to education. Now, most of the people we're trying to deliver to are working. They're quite often working in remote locations. They're going to be working full time. So the distance learning model or the online model tends to suit a lot of those people a lot better. They can't come onto campus 4 or 5 days a week to do their course. So the model for delivery, which I think is far best for the security industry, is that distance learning online model. I also think there are good and bad ways to deliver that. I think delivering too much material at once is a very bad thing for students. So, for example, I think the era of the lecture is very much coming to a close in higher education, where somebody stands at the front of the room and waffles on for an hour. I think that's coming to a close. We do very little teaching like that anymore. I think delivering material in small blocks and then having discussions around it and activities is a far more interesting and fruitful way to deliver education. So I think a more hybrid model is probably best in the long run, where some of the material is given to people up front, some of that online and through various virtual learning platforms, but then we should give people the opportunity to come together and discuss material and do activities. I think these are the best ways to learn.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed. We're running out of time, so I want to get some more questions in. I'm going to move a bit quickly. David, I'm going to ask you these questions because Michaela Alonge, I hope I've said that name right. I'm so sorry if I haven't. Michaela has asked about you mentioned non-formal education in your opening statement, David, and the fact that you accredit this. And I mean, the question is, how do we classify experience that is informal? I mean, very, very briefly, because I expect it's a complex area. Clearly, there's a way of doing it. Very briefly, David.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the APL route, I'm sure you've heard about the APL route, the accreditation of prior experiential learning, right? Which is in most of the quality frameworks around the world. The APL route is for people who do not have any formal qualifications. They've never been to university, but they've got tons and tons and years of working experience, right? So they have got this very small formal education, probably up to primary level or maybe a little bit of secondary level. But then they went into the industry and they started working, right? So when they started working, they did a lot of short courses, online courses, CPD courses, training, which the organization, the security company send them for training and this and that. So what APL does is it actually brings those people, gives them an opportunity to go for formal education. How? They combine them in a portfolio. They ask them to do a portfolio of all the experiences for the non-formal and the informal learning which they've had, right? And then they also go to a challenge test, right? So these are the types of steps done by APL in order for these people to actually gain access. It's APL access into the university, and they are qualified and they go in straight away. That's it.
Well, I mean, that could be a topic on its own, a fascinating one. Thank you, David. I'm going to move on, though, because I'm going to ask Gary a question that I've got from Mike Kroll. Gary, you're a very good person. You've already spoken about your military background. And we've had previous webinars, Gary, thought leadership webinars about the role of the police and military and security. And it polarized views. Those who say it's an essential background that's got key skill sets. Those who say it's missing the point at the highest levels, it's about business now, and that's not what police and military do. I just, nevertheless, it's still a big recruiting ground, and it's still a big relevant reference point. This transition about people starting in the industry or transferring from the police or military, that process, is it catered for well at present, Gary? And if not, why not?
It is not catered for well at the present, although it's getting better in terms of military people and possibly police as well, being made aware in their latter stages of their career, the opportunities that might exist in security type functions in civilian life. Having said that, I'm one of the advocates, as you might know from previous webinars, that I don't think that being a policeman or a military officer or a military rank actually is necessarily a good indicator that you're going to be good at security. So the military, generally speaking, do not do security. They do war fighting, and they might have some security functions within that, like the military police have got one or two, and the intelligence corps in my army have got one or two. But you're no better, at doing security than anybody else. The reason they get security jobs in the UK is that the cultural take on the whole thing, that the public and the private sector think that police and military are already security trained. But they are not, and that is key. So they might be well predisposed to the security cultural world that they're going to go into, but their knowledge base is not. Hence why I think there's a great reason why they need to get on courses at the right level and valid to actually get themselves prepared to do the transfer across. Just because you're military or a policeman does not make you a security person. So. Okay,
good, interesting answer. That very interesting, Matt. I'm interested at your level too, which is where this point about a massive recruiting ground, as Gary says, whether we see it as positive or negative, it still is a massive recruiting ground. Taking into master's level and degree level, what's your view of how you assess the police and military input into security in modern day Britain?
Well, I mean, I would agree with Gary. I think the transition is not that easy. It's not as straightforward as what a lot of people might think it is, in all honesty. And obviously, we talk to a lot of people who are ex-military and move into the security world. And I think one thing particularly about the training, is I find a lot of people are just confused about what sort of training they should be doing, what sort of levels of training they should be doing, and quite often they fetch up at the university doing courses which they tend to be interested in, but they're not always entirely sure as if it's the right thing that they should be doing, in all honesty. So I think there are those issues around the transition which are kind of very problematic on an individual level, in all honesty.
Perfectly understand. Right, I'm going to give you this is what you can do when you're a chair and not a panelist. When you're a chair, you can ask very difficult questions and give people 10 seconds to answer. Strategically, on a strategic level, I'd like each of you to just let me know, what's the strategically most important thing we need to do in security with regards to certification qualifications? What strategic change do we most need to make? Gary, let me come to you first.
Okay, if it's going to be that quick fire, it's going to be, I think, very much a regulatory body in UK, certainly, to actually build the foundation stones for the right training pathways or educational pathways, whichever is your choice, for the right level of functions throughout the security sector. No mean feat, but unless you go down that pathway, you're certainly not going to the end result. We're going to be here in 10 years' time talking the same issues.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. David, 10 seconds, just 10 seconds, big strategic issue.
I'm in agreement with Jerry, right? Professional council, professional bodies, regulatory bodies, they're different, right? So if a good balance between professional council and a regulatory body, that is my take on this. If you do not have a professional, you have only professional council, you may have cartel-like behavior.
Okay.
Without regulatory body, it's difficult. Yeah.
David, thank you very much indeed. Matt, 10 seconds, your strategic point.
I think there has to be some sort of mapping of what's available, whether this is SIA in the UK or wherever, but I think people need to know what's available. And I think there's got to be more done around quality assurance courses as well. For me, those are the two big things.
Panel, thank you very much indeed. Fantastic conversation. Definitely could have gone on. Thank you very much indeed to you all. Thank you very much indeed to the audience as well for your questions and for your input. I got some questions in advance and I didn't get to all of those. Just a final few points from me, if I might. Just to say that next week we're going to be at ISE, International Security Expo. This is being held in Olympia, London. We're on stand B70, so do come and say hello if you happen to be there. It's a big show. People are coming from all over the world, actually, so it's worth a trip if you are in London. Just so you know, the OSPAs, Germany OSPAs closes on the 26th of September. The Canada OSPAs closes the same day. And in the UK, you've got until the 4th of October. So do get your entries in them. We're back on the 13th of October. Listen to this. A webinar with a difference. We've got an interview with an ex-offender who was involved in terrorism. And we're going to be talking to him about his entree into the world of terrorism, about how he got involved, what motivated him, and what went on, and what we can learn from his experience. So I hope to see you on the 13th of October on that webinar. If I don't see you next week at ISE, thank you once again to the panel. Thank you very much indeed once again for all the questions. And until we meet again, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.